She told me to hand over the deed to my beach house. Right there, in front of everyone I had ever loved. And when I said no, she did something that I still cannot fully believe happened. Not because it shocked me, but because, in that moment, I realized I had seen it coming for years and had done absolutely nothing to stop it. My name is Edward. I am 63 years old. I built my company from nothing, a small architectural firm that I started in my late 20s with a second-hand drafting table and a phone I shared with my landlord. By the time I was 50, that firm had designed hospitals, university campuses, and 4 of the most recognized commercial towers on the East Coast. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you this so you understand what it means when I say that I gave my son everything I had built, and he handed it to someone else without blinking. My wife, Carol, passed away 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was 54. There is not a single day that goes by that I do not think about her. And there is not a single decision I have made since she left that I have not filtered through one simple question. What would Carol say if she could see this? I know what she would have said about what happened at that party. She would have said she saw it coming too. My son, Brandon, is 31. He is talented in the way that people who have never had to fight for anything can still be talented naturally, effortlessly, and with an absolute absence of gratitude for the conditions that allowed that talent to bloom. I paid for his architecture degree at a school that cost more per semester than I had earned in my first 3 years of running my own business. I hired him at the firm when he graduated. I gave him a salary that was, frankly, embarrassing for someone with his experience level. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself I was building something to pass down. Carol had warned me about that word investment when it came to Brandon. She said, "You do not invest in a child. You raise them. Those are different things." My daughter-in-law, Nicole, came into our lives 4 years ago. Brandon brought her to Thanksgiving dinner, and she sat at the table I had built with my own hands in the garage. The table Carol had sanded and stained herself the winter before she got sick, and Nicole spent the entire meal talking about a penthouse apartment she had seen in a magazine, not asking about the table, not asking about Carol, just the penthouse. I noticed it. I filed it away and told myself I was being uncharitable. They got married 2 years later. I paid for the wedding, all of it, not because it was my obligation. Nicole's parents are not poor people. Her father runs a chain of car dealerships in Connecticut. But because Brandon came to me 3 weeks before the date and told me that Nicole's parents had declined to contribute anything substantial and that he did not want Nicole to be embarrassed, I wrote the check. $240,000. I did not ask to be repaid. I did not make a speech about sacrifice. I just handed it over. Because that is what I had always done, and because somewhere deep in the back of my mind, I believed that the people you love will eventually see what you have done for them and meet you with the same generosity. That is the thing about blind spots. They do not feel like blindness when you are living inside them. They feel like faith. After the wedding, Brandon and Nicole moved into a condo I owned in the city, one of 3 properties I had accumulated over the years, alongside the main house where I still live and the beach house on the North Carolina coast that Carol and I had bought on our 20th anniversary. The beach house was her place. She had decorated every room herself, chosen every piece of furniture, planted a garden along the back fence that still comes up every spring without any help from me. I have not changed a single thing in that house since she died. I go there twice a year. I sit on the porch. I drink coffee in the mornings and watch the water, and I talk to her out loud, which I know sounds like something a person should be embarrassed about, but I am not. It is the only place in the world where I feel close to her still. Nicole had been asking about the beach house since before she and Brandon were married, casually at first. "Oh, Edward, you should really let us use it more often. It's just sitting there." And then, with slightly more pressure after the wedding, "It would make such a perfect getaway for us. And honestly, it must be a lot to maintain on your own." I had deflected every time. Politely, firmly, Brandon had never pushed the issue directly, but I had noticed, over the past year, that he had stopped pushing back when Nicole brought it up in front of me. He would go quiet in a way that told me he had already had a different version of that conversation with her, in private, and had arrived at an agreement I had not been consulted about. I turned 63 in October. Brandon organized a party at a rented venue downtown, a rooftop event space with a view of the skyline. About 80 people. Like 80 people, colleagues from the firm, old friends, a few neighbors, my brother and his wife who had flown in from Arizona. It was a genuinely lovely evening. I was moved by it. I remember standing at the bar early in the night, looking out at the city I had spent 30 years building things in, and feeling something I can only describe as quiet pride, not loud, just a small, warm recognition that a life of work had produced something real. Nicole found me at that bar at approximately 9:30 in the evening. She did not come alone. She had a folder with her, an actual physical folder, with papers inside. She set it on the bar next to my drink and she said, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "We wanted to give you your real birthday gift, tonight. Brandon and I have been talking, and we think the beach house should be in both our names. It just makes sense. With everything you've given us already, it would mean so much." She tapped the folder. "The paperwork is right here." I looked at the folder. I looked at her. I looked across the room at Brandon, who was standing about 20 feet away, watching us, and who looked away the moment our eyes met. I said, quietly and without any particular emotion. Nicole's smile disappeared. Not gradually. Instantly. Like a light switched off. She said, "Excuse me?" I said, "No. The beach house stays in my name. It was Carol's house. It will stay exactly as it is." What happened next took perhaps 4 seconds. 4 seconds that I have replayed more times than I can count. Nicole picked up the folder, and for a moment, I thought she was simply going to take it and walk away. Instead, she brought her hand back and she struck me across the face. Open palm, hard enough that I took a step backward and knocked my drink off the bar. The glass shattered on the floor. The music did not stop immediately, but the people nearest to us went silent in a ripple outward from where we were standing. The way silence spreads at a party when something has happened that cannot be unwitnessed. Within about 5 seconds, most of the room was looking at us. I did not raise my voice. I did not touch her. I pressed my fingers to my cheek for a moment, and then I lowered my hand, and I looked at Brandon, who had crossed the room when he heard the glass break and was now standing 3 feet away from us. He said, "Dad, you need to understand how much stress she's been under." I looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about the drafting table I started my career on. I thought about the check I had written for $240,000. I thought about Carol's garden, which comes up every spring without any help. I thought about what Carol would say. Then I took out my phone, and I made a call. I want to explain what that call was, because this is the part that took years to set up and about 3 minutes to execute. Shortly after Carol died, I had begun the process of restructuring my estate, partly out of practical necessity. She had been listed as the primary beneficiary on nearly everything, and partly because grief does strange and clarifying things to a person's relationship with money and property. I hired an estate attorney named Margaret, who had been recommended to me by a colleague. And over the course of about 18 months, Margaret and I had built what she called a comprehensive asset protection structure. Everything I owned, the properties, the firm, the investment accounts, sat inside a series of trusts and holding entities. Nothing was in my personal name, in the way that most people assume assets are held. The beach house, specifically, had been placed inside a revocable living trust of which I was the sole trustee. It could not be transferred, sold, encumbered, or in any way touched without my explicit written authorization. I had done this specifically. I want to be precise about this, not because I had anticipated Nicole asking for it at my birthday party, but because Carol had asked me to. In the last weeks of her life, She had sat with me in the beach house and she had said, very simply, "Promise me, you will protect this house. Not from anyone specific. Just protect it." I had promised her. Margaret had made the promise legally unbreakable. The call I made from the rooftop was to Margaret's emergency line. I told her what had happened. I told her I needed 3 things activated immediately. She said she would handle it before morning. The first thing was a formal revocation of Brandon's access to the firm's family partnership units that I had gifted him over the past 4 years as part of his compensation structure. Those units represented approximately 31% of his annual income beyond his salary. They were discretionary gifts, not contractual obligations, and Margaret had structured them specifically so they could be revoked at will. Brandon had never asked to see the underlying documents. I had never told him they were revocable. I had not hidden it from him either. He had simply never looked. The second thing was a notice to the property management company I used, instructing them to change the locks on the city condo that Brandon and Nicole were living in, the one I owned, and to deliver a formal 30-day vacate notice in accordance with the lease agreement they had signed, which was in my name and which had a termination clause that I had also never mentioned to them because I had never expected to use it. The third thing was a call to the venue coordinator, who I knew personally. He had done work for my firm, asking him to have 2 members of security escort Nicole from the building. Politely, professionally, but immediately. I stayed at the party for another 45 minutes after Nicole was escorted out. I talked to my brother. I thanked my colleagues for coming. I ate a piece of birthday cake. I am not a dramatic person by nature, and I did not want the evening to become entirely about what had happened. Some of my guests came to me quietly and said things like, "Are you all right?" And I said yes, because I was. I was more all right in that moment than I had been in quite some time. Brandon left when Nicole did. He did not say goodbye to me. He did not call that night. He called the following morning at 7:15. I was on the porch of my house drinking coffee. I let it ring. He called again at 7:40. I let it ring again. The third call I picked up. He said, "Dad, what did you do?" I said, "Good morning, Brandon." He said, "We got a notice from the property management company, and I got an email from the firm's accounting department saying my partnership units have been revoked. Can you tell me what is going on?" I said, "Yes, I can tell you exactly what is going on. What is going on is a consequence. You know what that word means. You have just never experienced one before, and I recognize that is largely my fault." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's my wife." "Dad," I said, "I know she is." He said, "You provoked her. You always have to make everything so difficult." I had been expecting some version of that sentence. I had been expecting it since the night before. Actually, I want to be honest about my reaction, because I think people sometimes expect a parent to feel wounded by that kind of accusation. I did not feel wounded. I felt something much closer to clarity. I said, "Brandon, your wife struck me in front of 80 people, including your uncle, including people who have worked for me for 20 years, because I declined to give her a house that belonged to your mother. If you have decided that my refusal to hand over your mother's house makes me the difficult one in that sentence, then I think we have very different definitions of that word, and I am not sure there is much for us to discuss right now." He hung up. I finished my coffee. A cardinal landed on the fence at the edge of the yard, the same fence where Carol had once spent an entire Saturday afternoon, stringing lights for a party we threw for my 50th, and I watched it for a moment. Then I went inside and called my brother, who had witnessed everything the night before, and we talked for about an hour. He said, "Ed, you did the right thing." I said, "I knew." He said, "Carol would agree." I said, "I knew that too." Over the following 2 weeks, the situation clarified itself the way situations do when money is removed from the equation. Brandon called 4 more times. The calls progressed in a predictable arc, first angry, then bargaining, then something that was almost contrition but stopped just short of it, like a person who has driven to the edge of a bridge and then decided at the last second to turn around, telling themselves they were never really going to jump. Nicole did not call. I had not expected her to. What I had not anticipated, and what I think is worth telling you, because it is the part of this story that I keep returning to, is what happened with the firm. Brandon had been running a small division of the architectural practice that focused on residential projects. I had given him that division 3 years ago as a way of giving him ownership, autonomy, a piece of something real. After the partnership units were revoked, he submitted his resignation. I was not surprised. I processed his severance, which was contractually straightforward, and I called a meeting of my senior staff to inform them of the transition. What I found, in the weeks after he left, was something I had not let myself see when he was still there. The division he had been running was losing money. Not catastrophically, but consistently. Several contracts had been underbid. 2 clients had left for competitors after experiencing delays that I had not been informed of. There was a vendor relationship, a materials supplier Brandon had brought in about 18 months earlier, where I discovered, after a careful audit, that we had been paying approximately 12% above market rate on every order. When I traced the vendor company, I found that its registered agent was Nicole's father. I called Margaret. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because the legal process is still ongoing, and there are things I cannot speak to in detail. What I can tell you is that Margaret reviewed the vendor contracts, the invoicing records, and the ownership documents for the supplier company, and she filed a civil complaint on my behalf that named both Brandon and the vendor. My brother, who is a retired federal prosecutor, reviewed the filing and told me quietly that the facts, as documented, were not kind to my son. Brandon called me the day after he was served. This was the only call in the entire sequence of events where he did not sound angry or entitled, or like someone performing an emotion for an audience. He sounded, for the first time in a long time, like a 31-year-old man who understood that something had gone very wrong and that he could not talk his way out of it. He said, "Dad, I need you to hear me." I said, "I am listening." He said, "I knew about the pricing. I didn't understand all of it at first. And then by the time I understood more of it, I didn't know how to tell you." She told me it was normal, that it was just how business worked. A pause. "I know that's not an excuse." I said, "No, it is not." He said, "Is there any way we can fix this? And here is the thing. Here is the part that I have thought about more than any other part of this story. I am 63 years old. I have built things and lost things and buried the woman I loved and raised a son mostly alone for the last 7 years of that son's formative adult life. I am not a person who finds forgiveness easy or automatic. But I am also not a person who believes that burning everything down is the same as justice." I said, "Brandon, I do not know yet. I genuinely do not know. That depends on things that have not happened yet. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear it clearly." I paused. "Your mother put a garden in the back of that beach house. Every spring it comes up the roses she planted, the lavender along the south fence, all of it, and it comes up without a single thing being done to it, because she chose what she planted very carefully. She understood that the things you plant are going to outlast the moment you plant them. Do you understand what I am telling you?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Yes, Dad, I think I do. I do not know how this ends yet. The civil matter will resolve itself through the legal process, and the outcome will be what it is. Brandon and Nicole are no longer living in the city condo. They moved out inside the 30-day window into an apartment I had no involvement in. Brandon has not been to the beach house. Neither have I, since October. I am planning to go in the spring, when the garden comes back. What I want to tell you, the thing I most want you to take from this, if you are sitting somewhere listening to an old man talk about his mistakes as much as his decisions, is this. The moment I said no at that bar was not the important moment. The important moment was everything that came before it. It was every time I had written a check, instead of having a hard conversation. Every time I had watched Brandon go quiet, when Nicole pushed for something and told myself it was none of my business. Every time I had valued keeping the peace over keeping my integrity and called it generosity. Carol did not build that garden because she wanted something easy. She built it because she wanted something real. And real things require honest conditions to grow. I did not yell at Nicole when she slapped me. I did not make a scene. I pressed my fingers to my face, and I looked at my son, and I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be in the next chapter of my life. Not the chapter where I was building things, but the chapter where I was deciding what was worth protecting and what had simply run its course. Then I picked up my phone and I made a call, and everything that followed was not revenge. I want to be precise about that word, because people will use it and I understand why. It was accountability. First, for the people who had taken advantage of a man they had decided would always absorb whatever they gave him. And then, quietly, honestly, for myself. For every moment, I had looked the other way and called it love. If you are watching this, and you have a son or a daughter or a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law who has been testing the limits of what you will tolerate, if you have been writing checks and telling yourself it is building something, if you have been staying quiet and calling it keeping the peace, I am not going to tell you what to do. I am 63 years old, and I am still figuring it out myself. But I will tell you what I have learned. The garden comes up in spring because Carol chose carefully what she planted. She did not plant things that would take over the yard. She did not plant things that needed more than they could ever give back. She planted things that were beautiful and strong and self-sustaining, and she put them in good soil and trusted the process. That is what love looks like when it is done right. Not unconditional, not bottomless, not a check you write to avoid a difficult conversation. Love that is done right has roots and structure, and the wisdom to know when something has grown in the wrong direction and needs to be cut back before it damages everything around it. I am going to the beach house in the spring. I am going to sit on the porch and drink my coffee and watch the water. And I am going to tell Carol what happened. All of it. The parts I am proud of and the parts I am not. I already know what she is going to say. She saw it coming years before I did. She always did. If any of this resonates with you, if you have been in a situation where the people closest to you took more than they gave, and you stayed quiet for too long because you loved them, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you are new here, welcome to Revenge Chronicles. We tell true stories about real consequences. And we always, always protect the garden.